Improving your communication skills has long-lasting effects on your kids. Their perception of their own ability to communicate, their idea of their social capabilities, their social skills, can be affected by your communication style. And this week, I'm going to tell you what to do. But before we get started, I want to remind you that if you are having a problem parenting your teenagers or young adults, and it's the same problem that you had last week, then I want you to give me a call. Let's get this taken care of. There is a link in the show notes that will take you to my calendar, or there are scheduling buttons on my website, allieirwin.com. Or as always, you can email me any questions or comments you have about the show at allieirwin.com.
Welcome to Parenting Successful Teens, the podcast that cuts through the overwhelm and stress of this phase and offers parents simple, practical, cognitive, science-based strategies for keeping their teens on track. Join master coach and real-life mom, Allie Irwin, to talk about real teens, real problems, and the skills it takes to raise successful adults.
This week, we are talking about communication skills, and I could easily do a 6-week class on communication skills. It is a big part of the private work that I do with private clients. And if you remember last week, it's a big part of my work because it's a part of that triune model on parenting adolescents that has the 3 areas. Triune means there's 3 parts. And those areas are warmth or affection, control or strictness, those are the 2 we covered last week, and communication. This model is from Diane Baumrind. Give her a shout out because I think it's a really nice summary of the components of parenting. So we talked about warmth and control last week. So if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely just go back 1 week. That's the episode before this one. And this week, we're going to talk about that third component, communication. Communication skills for parents are super important. They're important for all relationships, right? Like, why would parenting be any different? And so today we're going to focus on just 2 aspects of communication. But like I said, there are so many other aspects that go into good communication. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely reach out and we will talk about how we can work together. But today I'm going to give you a few things to think about. So the 2 aspects we're going to talk about today are 1, how we orient our conversations. Are our conversations oriented towards communication, to the conversation itself, or are our conversations mainly about getting compliance? So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is, in our conversations with our kids, are we encouraging them to get to know their emotions and to talk about them and learn how to manage them? Or are we teaching our kids to dismiss their emotions, suppress them? Only certain emotions are acceptable. Like, what are we teaching our kids about emotions? So the 2 aspects we're going to talk about today is, what is the point of a conversation? How are they oriented? What goal are they oriented towards? And in our conversations, how are we addressing the emotions that go along, with the words that we're saying? I'm just laughing about my notes here. I was corporate before I was a coach, and so I have a note scribbled down that says, this is all about best practices. There are 2 basic orientations in how our conversations with our teenagers and young adults are structured. And the first type of orientation is position-centered. And what that means is that there's a hierarchy where we see ourselves as the authority and like our kids are subordinate to us. And so when we tell them to do something, we just expect them to do it. Okay, it's focused on compliance. Like, get your shoes on, it's time to go. That is position-oriented conversation. Okay. We're not interested like how they feel about getting their shoes on. We're very goal oriented. A couple of other characteristics of position oriented is we expect our rules to just be accepted at face value. We don't want questions on these rules. There's good parts and bad parts to every kind of orientation. One of the good parts of this orientation is that it's faster. Like if you tell your kids to get their shoes on, it's time to go, and then you just expect them to do it, it's faster than if every single thing that happens all day long you have to have some sort of extended conversation for. The other kind of conversations that we have are person-centered, okay? So the first one, position center, that's saying like, I am a parent, I am above you in this org chart of our family. And the other one is more like, I'm a person, you're a person, and we're having a conversation. And that conversation is as much about communication and connection as it is about achieving any specific goal. And if you are using this type of conversation with a goal in mind, you're taking the time to help them understand why this goal is important, not just to you, but to them as well. Okay? And you're talking about maybe a situation has come up with your kids and, they took an action and you want to talk about what they did. You are going to help them see how their actions affected other people, not just negatively, like this doesn't just happen when they're in trouble, but maybe they did something that you think is really amazing and you want to talk about, and really help them see the effects, the positive effects of the action that they took. So this kind of conversation isn't necessarily about achieving a goal. It's about connection and relationship. And if there's a goal involved in these kinds of conversations, you're talking about motivation and, how they feel and you feel and the other person feels and all of that kind of messier stuff. Okay, so the first is like the because I said so, and this is the like you're talking about why and how it's going to affect everyone. So as you can imagine, this second kind of conversation is a lot more complicated. Like I said, the good part of the first kind of conversation is that it's really simple and fast. Like if you can just say, put your shoes on, it's time to go, and they put their shoes on and go, that's much more efficient. But we can't just use that kind of conversation, or I'm going to encourage you not to use only that kind of conversation, because modeling for your kids this more complicated form of conversation where you're taking other people's perspective into mind is the kind of conversations you have that have all of these other social purposes besides just achieving a goal. Like these are the conversations that we have with people to connect with them, to avoid loneliness, and to feel affection for other people. And so it's really important that our kids know how to have these conversations, and the way that they learn how to have these complicated conversations is with us modeling it for them over and over and over throughout their adolescent years. Okay? You can't just explain this to kids. You have to model for them, taking other people's feelings into account. And really, and I think I've talked about this in earlier episodes, a little bit, a piece of that is externalizing what you're doing naturally. Okay? Talking about your own feelings, talking about why you're making the decisions that you're making helps your kids see your thought process. So when they're out in the world, they can replicate that thought process, or they can use the pieces of that thought process that are useful to them. Of course, they're going to tweak it because they're different people than we are. But when you externalize, when you help them think, when you show them why you're deciding what you're deciding, you're teaching them about your decision-making process. And that's going to help them because then they can use that, they can replicate that when they have to make their own decisions. Okay. And this is a long process. Like this happens over the teen years. This is not a one and done. But just externalizing it will start to help them know why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, that's huge. The good news is that research shows that kids who are talked to in this way, and whatever age your kids are, like just start today, they rate their own conversation skills, their own social skills much higher. Okay, social intelligence is really, it's two things. It's communication skills and emotional intelligence. And this is a communication skills part. They will be much better. They will feel much better about their own skills. They'll know how to verbally respond to different situations. They will know what an appropriate level of disclosure is, because you've modeled for them what appropriate disclosure looks like. You know, like because I'm the mom and that's why. There's no disclosure there. Whereas if you're disclosing like, hey, when I don't hear from you and it's after curfew, I get really anxious. Like it's hard for me to relax. You know, it's hard for me to go to bed when I don't know like why you're not home. They're not going to like that. It's not like you tell them that and they're happy, but at least they'll understand you're showing them, you're putting them in your shoes, you know, and that's an appropriate level of disclosure. And all of those things happen inside these more complicated conversations. And so, you know, not every conversation, sometimes it's just put your shoes on, it's time to go. But on purpose, having these more complicated conversations with your kids and, you know, soliciting their input and understanding their motivations, all of that will help them develop these skills that they will use in every relationship they have going forward. This is a huge gift you can give your kids. Okay, the second piece is emotional coaching, which sounds messy and terrible. But I promise you it's not. And it's actually huge. Most people are not in tune with how they feel. Most people have been taught since childhood that their emotions are not important. And I laugh, you know, I grew up a Midwestern farm girl, and I was definitely taught my emotions were not important. Like people did not care how I felt. They just wanted me to get, you know, this chore done and get my homework done and do all the things that I was told to do. And my feelings about that were not particularly interesting to anyone. That does not mean I did not have caring, loving parents. That's just a sign of the times, the era I was raised in, the culture I was raised in. But I find that to be pretty common with the people that I talk to as well. And that is a bummer because our emotions contain so much information that when we don't know what we're feeling, we just miss out on that information. Or if we think we're feeling one emotion, oftentimes we have kind of like a go-to emotion that we just, it's almost like a default. Oftentimes there's another emotion hiding under there, maybe one that they weren't allowed to feel when they were little, like feeling disappointed was definitely discouraged in my family, because to be disappointed about something meant that you weren't grateful for what you had, and being grateful for what you have was a really big deal in my family. And it's not a terrible thing, but it's just out of balance. And many women are taught since they were little kids that it was not okay to feel angry. The archetype of an angry woman still has a lot of negative connotations in our culture, that to be angry is not nice. And so when we're feeling angry, there's often a cover emotion that comes and hides that emotion. It could be anxiety or sadness or compassion. We dismiss our feelings like, oh, we shouldn't be mad because they have this other thing going on. And so we should just excuse their behavior. And when there's anger, just using that example, if we were truly feeling our emotion, then we would know that it's time to set a boundary or a clear expectation. But if we don't know that we're feeling angry, if we think we're feeling anxiety or sadness or compassion, that has us take a different action. And so it doesn't actually solve the underneath problem. Okay, so if you don't know how to feel your emotions, obviously it's going to be really hard to teach your kids to feel theirs. Or if you have the belief that certain emotions aren't allowed, then when your kids exhibit those emotions, you're going to be really uncomfortable. And that's a really common thing that I see with my clients and with my friends, and even honestly with family members, is this thing I call bright siding. And that is where it's really difficult for parents to allow their kids to feel uncomfortable feelings. Okay, they want to hurry past those uncomfortable feelings and get to the problem solving, or they just tell their kids to look on the bright side. And I get it. Like, it's not pleasant as a parent to see your child suffering in some way, but they are suffering. The thing that they're feeling is real. And when you tell them to just look on the bright side, that's a really common way that we're teaching our kids to dismiss their emotions. That's a really common way to tell kids that only certain emotions are okay to feel or to share. Like, some emotions are socially acceptable and other ones aren't. So as parents, you have to develop the emotional capacity both to know what you're feeling, which I don't want you to worry about one bit. It's a totally learnable skill. Just maybe you haven't had people in your life helping you develop the practice of knowing what you're feeling, of getting that information from your own emotions. Okay, so you have to develop the emotional capacity, the emotional sensitivity to even know what you're feeling. Okay, that's like the first half. And then the second half is you have to develop the emotional capacity to be with someone that is suffering in some way and not rush past those feelings, not tell them why they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling. And to feel how you feel independent of how they feel. And I'm not saying that if someone tells you, that they're really sad because this terrible thing happened, that you're going to follow that up with like, oh, I feel fantastic. I just got a huge raise today. No, that is not what I'm talking about. You can hold the space for your friend to be sad and say, oh, I'm really sorry that happened to you, without taking their emotions on yourself. And again, that's just a skill. It's just a skill you can learn and you can practice. And when you do that, then you have the ability to teach that to your kids as well. And then they will go through life not feeling like they have to fix everything for the people around them. That's kind of what we're taught as women, is the way, like, if someone around us is sad, like, we don't get to be happy. We have to be sad in order to be a good friend. We have to be sad with them. And so we don't want to be sad. And so we try to fix the thing for our friend, partly because we want our friend to be happy, but also just partly because we want to be happy. Okay, so we get involved in fixing things that are not our business to fix. Developing the capacity to feel how you feel and allow other people to feel how that they feel as separate will actually give your kids the space that, they don't want you to take their problems away from them. They don't want you to fix them. They just want to share their feelings with you and have them be validated. And this is the skill. This is the secret to getting your kids to tell you what's really going on for them, is for you to not take it on. Okay? And again, this is just a skill. You can practice it and you can get good at it, and then you can teach them how to do it. Before I close this out, I want to give you a couple of examples of what this looks like in practice. The podcast today has been very theoretical because I think understanding the theory behind why we do what we do is important. but it's also useless if you don't know how to put that theory into practice. So here is a couple of examples, and I'm going to start with one from the emotional coaching section. I'm going to give you kind of a before and after. So the before is if your child is really upset about something that you don't see why they're upset about, you don't think it's such a big deal, you might say something like, stop overreacting. Or that whole bright siding thing, like, cheer up, it's not so bad. It's not such a big deal. Tomorrow you'll feel better. Look on the bright side. It could have been worse. Okay? That's emotional suppressant. That's telling them that their emotions about this situation don't matter, or that their emotions are making you uncomfortable. You need them to move on. And the pro-emotional coaching, we're not asking our kids to wallow in it. People think that the opposite of emotional suppressing is to just wallow in our emotions all the time, and that's not what I'm talking about here. That's why I feel like it's so important to give you a really concrete example. And so what I'm going to suggest you do instead is to just say what you see, which would be something like, I can see that you're really upset right now. Or just, I can see that you're really upset. That's even better without the right now part, because they probably feel like this is never going to end. And then just let them talk. And what you're doing is you're just validating their emotion literally by noticing it. And you can use this example for any emotion. I can see that you're really angry. I can see that you're really disappointed. You're just literally saying what you see and then leaving space for them to talk about that. Okay, and sometimes you'll do this and they'll tell you that they're wrong. They'll tell you that you're wrong. They'll correct what emotion. They'll say, I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated, or I'm just disappointed. And that's fantastic. You've done absolutely nothing wrong if you guess the emotion wrong, because you can see when they're naming their own emotion, then they're tapping into how they feel. So that's great if that happens. Okay, now I want to give you a positioned versus person-centered conversation from the first half of the podcast. The before is if they come to you with a situation and you just tell them what they should do, which I promise you is not going to go well in most cases. And so even if you say, I think you should, then at least you're indicating that it's just your opinion. I think you should call your teacher, which again, they're going to reject. But it's better because it's less of a directive than saying you should call your teacher. Okay? Even better solution would be to say, would you like to hear my opinion? Or asking them, what do you think you should do? Or what do you think your next step is? Or help me understand why you don't want to reach out to your teacher. And then just listen. And you may still agree with them at the end of the explanation. Their explanation might not change your opinion at all. But at least then you're asking them, you're getting a window into their logic. And them explaining to you why they want what they want helps them to stop and think. It helps them to stop and think about why they want what they want, because maybe they haven't even thought it all the way through, and just you asking and then truly listening helps them see their own thinking process. So I hope this was helpful. I think of that saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And this is an example of how you communicate. You're teaching your kids to communicate that same way. And as parents, we can use this time, this adolescent period with our kids to really improve our communication skills and lay the foundation for our adult relationship. we're going to have that adult relationship so much longer than we have the relationship where they're living under our roofs and they have to do what we say they're going to do. And so I really encourage you to use this time wisely. Use it to shift your conversational styles and really lay that foundation. Alrighty, talk to you next week.